Let's say you want to build the next Microsoft Teams, or maybe create your own podcast in your personal website. Maybe you just want to record something and save it in a database for later use. Whatever your choice is, there is something you need to learn to do so: audio recording and audio processing. In this project, we are going to talk about the web API specifically made to handle audio with JavaScript. And we are going to build a simple web application that will be able to handle the microphone permissions, list and select audio devices we want to use to record ourselves, record and save what is being fed into the microphone, play back the sound of each of the recorded audios, and even download the audio files into a WAV format so you can save it on your computer or even share with someone. By the time you're done watching this video, you will have the basics to start creating your own projects with audio. So let's begin. So first things first, we are going to need to set up everything. I'm going to be using Solid.js for this, but bear in mind that what I'm going to teach you can be used in any other framework or even vanilla JavaScript. I'm just going to use Solid so I can easily create the components and reactivity of our app, but the main focus here is that you learn to use the web API for media devices. So first thing I'm going to do is actually open my terminal and just go to my favorite workspace directory. So in this case, projects. Let's clear this up a bit. And what I'm going to do is actually execute the following command that's going to create a new Solid.js project for me. I'm going to name this project audio JavaScript. And it's not going to be in JavaScript, it's going to be in TypeScript. There you go. So now we can open this by typing code and the name of the project. And now that we have our project open, we can go ahead and open a new terminal. Go ahead and clear it. And let's start by installing Tailwind. This will facilitate the CSS for us. So Yarn. I'm going to be using Yarn, but you can go ahead and type everything I'm going to type using npm. So yarn add -d only on the development side, and then just the following modules. I can now go ahead and initialize the Tailwind project by typing the following command. There you go. And now we can go to the tailwind.config.js and actually just paste the following string inside the contents array. Finally, just go to the source folder, open the index.css file, and at the top, let's go ahead and paste the following directives, and also add a height of 100 video height, and the width, let's do the same. Okay, there you go. We can actually delete the .css file. We're not going to be needing that. And inside the app, let's go ahead and just delete everything and just write a simple hello world. Again, go ahead and delete the logo, the styles, not going to be needing that, and just clean the class. Now to start everything, just go to the terminal and start yarn dev. Open the URL in your preferred browser, and you should have your hello world. Now, just to make sure that Tailwind is working, we're going to change the class of this div. Let's say we want to add the text to red. So text red 500. And if you go back to your browser, there you go. Tailwind is working. We have Solid.js up and running. Now we can begin to build our application. Okay, so the first thing we're going to see is actually the permissions that the user has given related to the microphone. To do this, we actually need the following variable, which is the navigator. And inside this, we have a permissions variable. And the permissions does have a query method, which we can actually query what kind of permissions we want to take. So in this case, we want the permissions for the microphone. So we can go ahead and define the descriptor of the permissions, and it has an attribute, which is name. And the name of the permissions we do want to know, it's the microphone one. Now, bear in mind that TypeScript will actually complain, saying that the type microphone is not assignable to the type permission name. This is wrong. You actually do have this type of permission. So the only thing you have to do is actually define this type as a permission name. There you go. And then this will return a promise that will return the actual state of the permission. So go ahead and this will be a callback function with the result of the query. There you go. So now we can actually extrapolate the state of the permission from this. So we'll go ahead and console log just to check if everything is okay. Let's go ahead and log the query results dot state. This is where we have the current state. Actually, let's go ahead and add current here. And this will give us the current state of the permission for the microphone as soon as the page is loaded. But what if we want to know, as soon as the page has been loaded, if the user actually changed the permission or not? So to do this, we can actually go ahead and define a new callback function on change. And this will receive a new kind of results. And if this result does have the target variable, we can actually go ahead and just console log the state. So on change result dot target dot state. Now again, TypeScript will complain about this. Don't worry, this does work. You just have to typecast it. So go ahead and parentheses and write as permission. There you go. Now if you go to your browser and open the inspect, go ahead and go to the console. And you can see that I already granted the permission for the microphone. But if I go now here at the top, you can see these are my permissions. So if I actually disable this, there you go. It appears denied. So now the user explicitly said it has no permissions for the microphone. If we open our application in a different port, we can see that the current state is actually a prompt. It's not either denied nor it is granted. This is because the first time you actually open a new application, if the value is not stored, then actually the first state that the permission is on prompt. So there are three states. The prompt, which is the first permission state, you have the granted, and you have the denied. Now that we actually have a way to check which kind of permission we do have from the user, let's go ahead and just add a visual way to actually check this. I'm going to be using already pre-made components, but go ahead and make your own if you prefer, or just follow along and copy paste what I'm going to show you. So first things first, let's start with the main application itself. For now, it's just going to be a little wrapper that's going to fill the whole screen and center everything in the middle. And just let's add a title, call it JavaScript Audio Manager. And this is what it's going to look like. Now what we need is actually a signal to capture the permission state for the microphone. So let's go ahead and create one. And it will have, as we discussed, the three states, which is granted, prompt, or denied. The first time the user begins the app, it's going to be denied. And let's go ahead and create a new function handler, which will be responsible for handling the current permission state for the microphone. So in this case, we're just going to set the signal to the same state that's going to be passed through this function. Go ahead and move this function up. And now we can actually call it. So instead of logging this, we can actually pass in the query results.state inside the handler. And the same things for the onChange result. Okay, perfect. Now that we have our signal being changed every time the user changes the current permission state, we can actually go ahead and create the components that will visually demonstrate that. So first, if the permission state is equal to granted, let's go ahead and just create a component. We'll give it a green background and actually an icon and the has microphone permission paragraph. If the permission is actually still on the prompt, then go ahead and copy the following component. This will be the same thing as the one as the granted. The only differences are on the background color and the actual icon itself and the paragraph string. Lastly, let's do it for the denied state. Going back to the application, we can see that we have now visual feedback on the user's permission for the microphone. So currently it's denied. If we go up here and actually turn it on, you can see that the user actually gave us the microphone permission. Now that we know which kind of permission the user gave us, we are actually going to get the list of audio devices available once the permission is granted to us. So to do this, let's go ahead and create a new function and let's call it available audio devices. This will return a promise of the available audio devices. So how can we get them? Again, using the Navigator API, we actually have a variable called media devices, and it has a function called enumerate devices, which actually gives us the media devices that's available to us. But bear in mind that we only need the audio ones. So to do that, just go ahead and filter the devices by their kind. And let's say that their kind are simply the audio input ones because we don't need anything else. Lastly, we are just going to need from them the ID in the name, so we can actually do a mapping from the device ID and the label of the audio input. At the end, just resolve the available devices, and that should be done. And we should now have a working function that gives us the available audio devices. Now let's create a new signal for this that saves the current devices we do have. Let's create an interface for this kind of object. Let's call it audio device. And it will be just an ID and a name, both being string. So now to create the signal, this is just going to be an array of the type audio device, which we just created. And let's set it to an empty array at first. Let's actually go ahead and create a new signal, which will correspond to the current selected device. So let's call it selected audio device, and it will be either a string or undefined, being the string the ID of the current selected audio device. Don't forget to set it to undefined. And now we can go ahead and change the handle permission state for every time that the state is changed. If the state is equal to granted, then we are going to get the audio devices, set them in the signal, and actually set the selected audio device to the default one. Now let's go to the bottom and actually render the new component. First of all, it's only going to show if the permission is granted. We don't want to show any device if the user did not give us permission. Otherwise, let's just import the for loop. And the only thing we're going to render here is actually the name of the audio device and its correspondent ID. We also just change a little bit of the styling of the items. So if the selected audio device has the same ID from the device, then it changes the border to indigo. And we are going to create now a handle click select audio device. So every time that we click on one of these devices, it just sets the signal to the correspondent ID of our selected audio device. So go ahead to the top and just create that handler. And now if we go to our application, we can see that we do in fact have a list of devices. The first one being the default one, it's the first that's going to be selected, but we can go ahead and change it by clicking on them. This will change the signal of the selected audio device. And if we go ahead and just remove the permission, then we see that we no longer have a selection for our devices. Now that we have our permissions and our selected device, we can go ahead and start recording our audio. So to do that, first let's create a button. Go ahead and put it below the user declined permission. And we are just going to render it if we have the access granted and if it is not recording. So we have to actually define that signal. Scroll to the top and create a new Boolean signal if the user is actually recording or not. Going back to the button, we are going to define a new handler and we're going to call it handle click start record. And this will be the function responsible to handle the logic every time we want to start recording. This is only going to work if we have a selected audio device, which is represented by this if. If we do have the audio device, then we start recording. So we set the signal to true. And then we have this special function, get user media, which is from our media devices API. And the way this works is we define either if we want an audio or a video. So in this case, we will want an audio. And then it will return us the stream of the data of the recording itself. For the audio attribute, you actually have two choices. Either you set it to true and that will actually select the default media device to capture the sound. Or you can define the own device through the device ID. To do that, we actually check if we do have a selected audio device and if it is a string of length greater than 0. And if so, we say that the audio is in fact an object with the device ID of our selected audio device. Otherwise, it's only true. Once we have the stream, we actually want to create a new media recorder object. So go ahead and create one. This will receive the stream itself and some options in the form of an object. So let's go ahead and create those options, which will be an object of the MIME type audio. And the media recorder will have two event listeners, one for the data available and another one for when we want to stop it. So for the data available, every time there is a new data, we can actually extrapolate the data from the event and just save it somewhere. So in this case, we're going to save in an array and we'll call it recorded chunks. So every time we do get a new data, the only thing we are doing is pushing on to that array. Finally, we get the stop event listener. So every time we want to stop the media recorder, actually what we want to do is get all of the tracks from the stream and just stop every track. Now we could go ahead and create the media recorder from this function, but we are actually going to be needing this variable in another function. So what we can actually do is just define it on the top of the component and just set it to undefined for now. The last thing we need for the recording is actually to stop the recording. So for that, we're going to create a new function and let's call it handle click stop record. And the only thing it does is it sets the signal of recording to false. And if there is in fact a media recorder, then let's go ahead and just stop it. This will trigger the stop event listener that we defined earlier. Now going back to our JSX, at the bottom, below the record button, we are actually going to set another button, and this will be the stop one, and it will only be rendered again if we have the granted permission and if the user is recording at the moment. And on click, we will call the handle click stop record, which will stop the stream and all of its tracks. Actually, we are missing something, so every time we click on the start record, we actually are creating the media recorder, we're adding the event listeners, but we do in fact have to start. Otherwise, it won't work. So now going to the application, we can see that if we click record at the top, we get this red light indicating that we are in fact recording. And if we click again on stop, then the light disappears, meaning we are no longer recording. Now to actually store our saved audios, we are going to use again another signal. So let's go again on the top and just put a new signal and let's call it saved audios. It will be an array of arrays because remember that each of the audios will be an array of data. And now what we want to do is go to the handle click start record. So every time we stop the recording, we want to save this audio. So on the stop event listener, we are actually going to update our array on the signal. And we are going to pass the current value that's on the array plus the recorded chunks for this audio piece. Now to visually represent these audios, we're just going to go to the bottom of our component and we are going to create our list of audios, which will be a solid.js for loop for every saved audio we have. And for now, let's only show a list of the number of audios we have and give it a name of audio and the index that it's currently saved to. In our application, if we hit record and then just stop, we can see that we now have a new audio list. Hitting again and stopping again will create a second audio, and we now are storing in our signal every recorded chunk for every piece of audio. Now to actually hear the audio, we are going to add an HTML audio tag, and we are going to create a new function called getAudioRef, which will be responsible for creating our audio URL source from our audio chunks. Let's go ahead and create this function. We can actually create on top of the request permissions. There you go. And what this does is it will receive the index of the audio we want to get the URL from, and it will create a new blob. And from that blob, we are going to create an object URL and simply returning it. This will be the source for the audio player. So going back to our application, if we now hit record and just say, hello guys, and just hit stop, we will now have an audio player with our sound. Just hello guys. But let's say that we don't only want to hear the audio from our browser, we actually do want to get a file and store it somewhere in our computer. For that, we can actually download it. And we do so by first creating a download button. Let's just put it below the audio. And now we're going to create the handler for the download. So let's go to the top, and below the stop recording handler, we can actually create our download handler. And this will work very much like the get audio ref. So we are creating an URL from the blob from the recorded chunks, but now we are actually creating an HTML element. So we can append it to the body, click it, and then just remove it. This will trigger the download on the browser. So let's see if this works. Let's hit record, just say something, stop. And there we go, we have the download button here. Let's go ahead and click it. And there you go. You now have an audio file with a WAV format. Lastly, let's just create a new delete button. So every time we create a new audio, we can actually delete it. So for each of the audio items, we are going to create a new button. And again, we are going to create a new handler for this. So going a little bit to the top, we can actually create it again above the request permissions. And the other thing it will do is actually filter the saved audios on the signal. So now if we have multiple files and there is a specific one that we don't like, we can actually go ahead and click on the garbage bin and it will delete it. You now know the basics of handling audio on JavaScript. This is a very important tool which you can add to your toolbox and start entering the world of audio processing. If you want to learn more about this API, I'll just leave the link in the description down below. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if so, please hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers!